I will record the video now and we continue speaking about chapter 8, which is describing some main issues of clinical research, providing detailed information about how clinical research is planned. The preparation of research protocol and the main issues of composition of how to build up the clinical protocol. What I want to say in the beginning is the definition, because we always start with definitions. And in our case, we have to speak today about definition of clinical trial. What is the main understanding of this term? We speak about clinical trials when we are investigating, when we do our research or observation on humans, okay? We cannot use the term experiment in this case, and we use the term clinical trial. So the clinical trials may have different nature. They may be part of observational studies, broadly speaking, and experimental studies form part of observational studies also. So we are involving humans, and that's why we call it trial. What is the main intent, the main purpose of clinical trial? The main purpose is to find out new treatment for concrete diseases or group of diseases. The main intent is to find out new knowledge about how to prevent the development of pathologic condition. The main idea is how to reduce the side effects of treatment, the side effects of medication, the side effects of psychological trauma treatment. As you already remember, humans, we are not only physiological organisms, but we are also spiritual organisms, spiritual creatures, phenomena. And that's why our health is composed both of physical or physiological or anatomical structures, and also from our psychological phenomena, from our philosophical understanding of the world which surrounds us. That's why the main idea of clinical trials may be reducing of side effects of treatment, finding new ways of treatment, for example, finding new vaccine or new protocol of treatment, which is especially very important in today's pandemic situation if you just don't want to go far to find the example. So clinical trials may be conducted as a series of experiments, and a long series of clinical trials must be conducted frequently in order to support the formulation of different protocols of treatment, of prevention, of reducing side effects of treatment, of possible elimination of new side effects, and of understanding the nature of diseases, the pathogenesis of diseases, to make the differentiate diagnosis in our concrete case. So when we see that we have some pharmaceutical company has synthesized new drug, for example, some new representative of beta blockers, and this drug is very promising in our experimental models, it works quite nice, and we see that side effects are reduced and animals start surviving, and the laboratorial data is improving. Now we have to introduce, the next step is introduction of the newly synthesized medication into clinical practice, to work with volunteers or with people who suffer from concrete disease. So we have to compare the benefits of new treatment compared to the traditional approaches, how it was treated before introducing this new medication into pharmaceutical market, and before we introduce it and get license to sell it into drugstores, we have to pass very positively the clinical trials, the last stage of examination of newly synthesized pharmaceutical. So trials are used to document the effect of a new drug. It's very important. But please remember that these trials may take very big period of time. So when we are developing a new drug, in your textbook you have a very nice smart box which describes 4 stages of developing of a new medication. We have 4 stages. First stage is we're studying toxicity and side effects. Toxicity on concrete organ or system or tissues or cells. Toxicity generally on the whole organism. And side effects of treatment. We study the dose response of this new medication. We are comparing the results of this medication with established treatment or with placebos. That's why we are creating control groups in order to have possibility to compare. Without comparison, our research will lack validity. And post-marketing, it's very important. How to introduce the medication into pharmaceutical market. So the first step in case of our clinical trial is experimental protocol. A detailed protocol should be written before we start our trial. So what are we stating? What is the aim of this protocol? The main aim of the protocol is to start the goal, to document its trial plan, its inclusion and exclusion criteria, the treatments and clinical examinations, the evaluation of response to treatment, randomization, blinding, number of patients, maybe we are grouping them into different groups, and separately control group of patients. Plan for statistical analysis and reporting of adverse effects. These are main constitutive parts of the experimental protocol. So I should repeat it. Aim of the study, documenting its trial plan, its inclusion and exclusion criteria, the treatments and clinical examinations, the evaluation of response to treatment, randomization, blinding, number of patients, plan for statistical assessment, and reporting of adverse effects. So we have some main principles or principal points of a protocol. The protocol should be written step by step. We should follow this protocol very closely during our clinical trial. So we state the purpose. Why do we plan and implement and realize and conduct this clinical trial? Trial plan. Trial plan is description. You understand it, right? The trial plan is first step will be this, and the next step will be such, and next will be such. and describing shortly, briefly the steps. So number of patients is very important. How many patients are we including? So if we cannot have big number of patients, we have to ensure the minimum number necessary for generalizing the results later. Description of treatment is very important, very detailed description to catch the difference between traditional method of treatment and this innovative method of treatment. That's why treatment should be described as carefully as the composition of the new medication. So patient follow-up. Why follow-ups are important? In all cases. In case of acute diseases, in case of chronic diseases, never mind. Follow-ups are very important from different points of view, among which the cumulative effect, toxic effect of drug is very important. What does it mean, the cumulative toxic effect of medication? When we are administering new medication and when patient receives new medication, all medications, they have toxic effects. Some of them are eliminated by kidneys, other by respiratory system. So you see that when you are administering new medication during a couple of months, the cumulative effect may not be so high and so toxic. But when patient receives the medication during 6 months or more, the toxic effect additionally receives the cumulative effect. Okay? So the follow-ups are important in order to find out what is the cumulative toxic effect of new medication in case of concrete disease or group of diseases. The same happens in case of treatment. For example, when we are introducing new ways of treatment for cancer patients, we should see after 6 months, after 12 months, after 36 months, what is the cumulative effect of treatment? What is the toxicity of the treatment, of hormonal therapy, for example, of radiation therapy, of different and novel methods of therapy? So these follow-ups, that's why they are very crucial for understanding the possibilities of reducing on the first stage and total elimination of toxic effects in the long run. At the same time, we should take into consideration that follow-ups are very individual. So with the same diagnosis, with the same stage of metastasis, for example, the response of organisms will be individual. That's why we say that 21st century medicine is individual-oriented medicine. Okay? Because with the same family history, with the same clinical manifestations, the response of organisms will be very individual, and it will be based on individual acceptance of the surrounding world, on additional diseases, accompanying diseases, which accompany the main disease. Okay? So, statistical analysis, it should be very carefully estimated which statistical analysis we use for concrete study, because today we live in the digital era and we have not only different methods of analysis, but also different softs, different computer programs to analyze statistically. And for different study designs, the statistical analysis may also differ. That's why when we are writing down our clinical trial protocol, we have to think a little bit which concrete statistical method of evaluation should we use in this concrete research design. Administrative matters and ethics form the last part of this protocol. If you remember your research part 1, in the second chapter we were speaking about ethics in research. And we have mentioned that all hospital departments and all universities, all medical research centers in developed countries, I'm making emphasis on this, in developed countries, they possess their own ethics committees. The main purpose of creation of ethics committees is to observe if the research planned follows all ethical recommendations which act in concrete society. So if you remember the second chapter, or if you don't, please reread it. It's very important because there are some ethical rules which consist of moral understanding of ethical issues which are universal. What do I mean when I speak about their character to be universal? Universal means that we are applying these ethical understandings to all patients, despite their sex, their age, their country of origin, their ethnic group, religious or culture specificity. Okay? So it means that moral component, which forms big part of ethical understanding of the research, moral component should be included into the description of your protocol, of your research protocol. When we speak about moral, we have to remember that moral is invention of human, because animals, they lack this understanding. They have their psychology, and we also have different branch of science which is called ethology or zoopsychology, and which studies psychological moments of interaction in animal society, different societies. But moral, it's a pure individual invention. It was invented by us, and it forms parts of our ethical understanding, of our ethical composition of the world. So our moral principles, they are united and represented as values, which are a form of our culture, in which we are sharing. So what makes us society is the similarity of values which we share. Okay, for example, we are part of academia, we are part of university, because all we share some civic values. So this understanding should be incorporated in the research protocol. For example, if we use experimental animals, any sort of animals, white rat, white mice, frogs, monkeys, pigs, cats, dogs, we should describe our protocol in a way to let possibility to the members of the ethics committee to understand, do I behave myself with animals in an ethical manner? For example, animals should not feel pain during experiments. If animals die during or after the experiments, animals should die without suffering, to bring just one example. So it means when we are describing how animals are dying after experiment, they should die in an ethical way, if we can let ourselves express in such a way. Okay? So that's why ethics committee is estimating how ethically had we imagined our research, because the main idea of research is to benefit all members of society, and without ethical approaches is absolutely impossible. So we need to receive approval to work with patients. We receive this approval from ethics committees and for managers of our hospital departments. We are studying very carefully patient characteristics and patient's actual condition before we start including them in the clinical trial. In advance, we decide the number of patients which should be included. So this leads to a fixed sample design. Okay, if the intended number of patients is large, data may advantageously be analyzed one or more times in the course of the trial. If conclusions on the effect of a treatment can be drawn early on, new patients need not be included. So you see, there are many ifs, there are many signs of interrogation. So all clinical trials, they are very individual. We can say that they need, despite the general understanding of main components of how trials should be constructed and composed, every clinical trial is very individual. Okay? So we have a very important paragraph here, which is called historical controls. So as we already know, without control group, there is no clinical trial. In order to have possibility to compare the results received from patients and from patients who receive placebo, or patients who receive standard treatment, they also can serve when we are introducing new medication. The control group may be composed both from patients which received standard treatment and for patients which received placebo. In the previous the patients which were previously treated, they are termed historical control. So historical control is a group of patients which were previously treated. It entails difficulties to use these historical controls because it's very difficult to achieve the very frank comparison. Okay? So if the two groups compare differ in other ways than the treatment administered, it's difficult to say whether a seemingly better outcome in the group receiving the new treatment is due only to that treatment. So historical controls is not subject to inclusion and exclusion criteria for this concrete reason. It's also possible that current patients are of a different type that are treated previously, months ago, 6 months ago, or a year ago. Another problem is that the quality of recording of the treatment effect for the historical controls may be substantially lower, as they were not originally part of a trial. So retrospective collection of information seldomly can overcome the problem. Even more, as a rule, the criteria for evaluating response may change with time. It may change, and it's normal. So historical control should be used as little as possible. Historical controls must provide a basis for the generation of hypotheses, but should not be used in reaching conclusions concerning an effect. So we cannot use them when we are concluding something, okay? Because they are historical. Okay. Another part is randomization. Randomization means randomly allocation of patient to treatment. The purpose of randomization is to prevent systematic differences between the treatment group. So I'm selecting patients randomly to compose a group of patients. The most common randomization is 1-to-1, that is approximately equal number of patients in both groups. However, in comparisons of new and established treatments, occasionally more patients may be included in the new treatment group, as the new treatment group is less known, as the new treatment is less well known. Okay, so you can include, for example, 30 patients in new group and 20 in another. In studies including a placebo, the randomized groups may be numerically unequal because one wants fewer patients to receive placebo. Okay, so that's why when we say that detecting the number and estimating the number of patients in the groups, it's very interesting, important, and we should very carefully come close to this question. Okay, so what I wanted to share with you also is this first part of this chapter. Mostly it happens that as we cannot conduct parallel studies in all countries worldwide. For example, if you take as an example the current pandemic situation. Okay, pandemic means that it's evident in all countries on all continents. Now imagine that we have different clinical manifestation of this viral activity. If we take, for example, countries which are neighbor countries, for example, countries of West Europe, and countries which are even on different continents. Okay, how we are studying and what clinical signs we are studying. We're studying incidence of disease, we're studying morbidity, we're studying outcome, and especially different part of outcome is the lethal outcome, the percentage, and also we're studying the side effects. All these main criteria, there may be additionally other criteria also included in the protocol, other points which we want to study. But all these criteria could be country specific, culture specific, geographically determined, demographically determined. For example, when we say that, for example, in Italy, we have high rate of lethal outcome, high incidence of lethal outcomes, we say that one of the possible reasons to explain this lethal outcome is the longer average lifespan of population in Italy or in China. So we say that a lot of viral infections may be risky for concrete focus group due to their age, because people have, when they are after 65, they have different accompanying diseases. And these different accompanying diseases may complicate their health status and result in different complications and may be decisive in treatment. So we say that, for example, in case of different flus, when we don't have the concrete protocol of treatment, the concrete guideline how to treat, and we are just treating it symptomatically. So we see some complication from respiratory system, we start treatment of respiratory problems. We see complication from cardiovascular system, we start treatment of cardiovascular signs. But the main idea is to understand the nature of the viral activity, the nature, how is it possible to predict possible complications, to prevent the population? Maybe ultraviolet radiation is what we need to inactivate the virus, because all viruses are inactivated when they receive the direct sunlight, because the ultraviolet spectrum they cannot resist. So what we have to understand is how correctly to establish the clinical protocol in order to better formulate the research groups, the group of patients which we are observing, because we definitely need to formulate concrete approaches for concrete focus group of patients. So for population up to 65, the approaches will be different. In case of children, including school children, which have quite strong immune response, which have a lot of experience of infection diseases, and which are physically very active, and where we do not observe chronic diseases in case of children mostly. So our approach to the children group, to this focus group, should differ from approach of the group which consists of population over 65. Okay. Especially important is the group of population which has very low immune response due to different reasons, due to AIDS, due to chronic diseases, systemic diseases, due to hypersensitivity and allergic reactions. So approaches differ, but the main idea is the same. Try to understand the nature of the disease in order to diminish on the first stage, to decrease the complications, and later, as the long run plan, later to prevent the development of disease, or to receive the mild forms of disease, to be less contagious for other people, or to create a vaccine, or to create a concrete protocol how to treat this disease. So we should understand that clinical trials are important not only in case when we are synthesizing new medication, but clinical trials may be one very flexible and very productive instrument in case of elaborating new methods of treatment. So if we see that sunlight, physical activity, some other additional components which we can add to our everyday activity, or the propaganda of healthy lifestyle, if we see that it strengthens our immune response, we should pay attention on continuously introduction of this offering of these methods of prevention to society members. So that's why we say that research helps us to understand the nature of disease, the nature of pathogens, the metabolism, and the possibility of our organism to react, to response. Because it's impossible to find two organisms which will respond in a similar way, because we all are very individual. We all may have the same diagnosis, the same metastasis, the same stage, everything's the same, but our response to disease will be different. So why people in some countries have longer average lifespan, and why in some countries people frequently die after 65? Because these are determined by different factors, starting with geography, with climate, with air contamination, with alimentary preferences, with genetical predisposition, when some of the genes which are responsible for development of the concrete pathologic conditions, they are activated, and another group of genes are inactivated. So we can say that anyway, we need to understand the nature of, in our case, of viral infection of coronavirus in order to start to elaborate better methods of treatment of disease. Because, for example, if you think about vaccine, you need as a minimum 1 year to create it. Meanwhile, people are dying, people continue suffering. You cannot create vaccine so frequently. It's not a building to build in 3 days. Meanwhile, before you are creating the vaccine, you can introduce some innovative methods in treatment of diseases. That's why we say that it's very important not only to treat, but to prevent. And not only to prevent, but to educate the members of society. We need to educate them in order to let them understand that public health, which is composed of the health systems of each individual which forms the society, is our individual creation. We can strengthen our health or make the opposite things. Or we can reduce the possibility to resist to new challenges, being viral, bacterial, or other sort of, or of other nature. So clinical trials help us to find out not only characteristics of how new medications or how new vaccine work, but clinical trials also help us to understand how our organism is composed, what is our feedback to the challenges, to the factors which irritate us, which demand our concrete reaction in concrete contexts. Okay? You can easily imagine that some diseases are diagnosed in concrete societies, in concrete populations, because some diseases are related with personal hygiene, and where the hygienic norms are very low, the diseases are more easily developed. For example, there are countries where alcohol abuse is a very big problem. In the same Georgia, unfortunately, it's a part of our culture to drink, and we drink very frequently. And it's very risky. It's risky for different diseases, for developing some chronic diseases, some chronic liver inflammation. It's risky for our central nervous system functioning. People who drink continuously, they suffer from insomnia. When you can't sleep normally and physiologically, and if you don't sleep, you give no possibility to your brain to rest. Our central nervous system is excited and our behavior is changed. So you see, everything is very interconnected and related. That's why we have to find out what is determining factor in concrete disease or group of diseases. Why these factors start acting, and when they start acting, what is our response to them? Now you can imagine that designed for clinical trial may be very different. It's up to concrete demand, what we are looking for. What do we want to investigate, to study? So it depends on questions like, what is important to study today? And why we detect the concrete diseases and why we finance and study them. The incidence is one of the main factors, together with prevalence, which shows which diseases to detect and to study and to finance. Because public health system in any country is a very expensive system. Expensive system means that normally public health projects are never financed only by government. They are financed by private donation systems. For example, I'm a very famous soccer player and I give some couple of millions to treat children leukemia. Okay, it's private donation. There are organizations, for example, UNICEF or Save the Children, which also donate to elaborate new approaches to vaccination or to treat children leukemia or children epilepsy. What we need to determine for ourselves is, why do we need to elaborate the concrete approaches in different historical time? Okay, because in different time contexts there are different diseases prevalent, and as time goes, diseases also change. Diseases have ability to change because our response to diseases changes them, and at the same time our response is also subjected to changes, because when I'm 25 I have different response to viral infection. When I am 50 it's changed, and when I am 75 it's totally different. So what changes the diseases is understanding and our response, our organism's response. What changes diseases is climate changes. What changes diseases is abnormal treatment of diseases. Okay? So this huge system, which is called public health, should implement new and new approaches to clinical trials. Because when public health workers are determining in which regions they should provide and implement the concrete public health project, they are basing their understanding on incidence and prevalence of diseases. They should prove for their donors, why do I select Georgia to treat tuberculosis, for example? Because I have high incidence of new cases each year. Okay? With a population of 3 million, when I have 3,000 new cases, it means tuberculosis is a huge problem here. And I need to strengthen the battle against this. I need to find new ways. You know, 21st century is a century of migration. It is a century of urbanization. People are traveling a lot, and people are traveling with their diseases. You cannot ask them just leave your diseases here at home and come to our countries. That's why we should respect the understanding of some European countries when they refuse to receive refugees, because they are responsible for public health criteria which are implemented in their countries. Okay, so this is the first part of chapter 8, which we are trying to read together with you. If you will have any questions, please do not hesitate to write me. You can turn on your microphones or write in the chat, and I will try to answer. Okay, Giga has no questions. Good. So, when I will disconnect our meeting, this lecture will be automatically recorded and set to your portal, and you can listen to it once more. But please remember that lectures are only introductions to textbook. Okay? So you cannot prepare yourself only based on lectures. Do we have any questions concerning this first part of chapter 8? Any questions? Good. So it means it was understandable. Okay. So thank you for joining. And I hope to have possibility of this virtual meeting with you, and to have possibility to speak with you next Saturday. The day is same, the time same, okay? Saturday at 11. Thank you very much for your attention.